Welcome! In this series of short videos, we will look at topics common to both the PowerBasic console and Windows compilers. Today we will look at the creation of a simple dialog and underlying code to automate common tasks. This is the folder in which I store all my YouTube projects for PowerBasic. Each folder is a project in its own right. If we open up one of the folders, we will see that it contains a number of subfolders. There is a PowerPoint presentation which is used for the beginning of the video. There is also a pre-work folder which contains the code which is used to develop the application. And in addition, there is a code folder. This is a folder into which I create all the code during the making of the video. And the video itself is recorded into a recordings folder. This will contain the raw video before editing and the final video, which is then uploaded to YouTube. So when I start work on a new project, I need to create these folders. And additionally, the PowerPoint presentation, which is used for the beginning of the video. So what we're going to do today is we're going to automate the creation of these folders. One of the tasks to which applications are often put is that of automation. This is to allow a series of actions to be carried out in the same manner time after time. Such automation is where computers and programming languages come into their own. So let's create a Windows application whose job it is to allow us to gather the information from the user in order that this folder structure can be created. Let's have a look at the code. We will create our application in this Project Creator code folder. And we're going to create the application in the PowerBasic Windows compiler. So our application is going to have to prompt the user for a number of questions. So we will create a skeleton in the Forms Designer. So we're going to call our application Project Creator. And we'll go up to the Tools menu and click on PowerBasic Forms. So now we can click on the New Dialog button on the toolbar. This will give us a brand new dialog. And we can set the size of our dialog, and we will first of all go into the dialog itself and set a few properties. We will go to the Styles tab, and we're going to set this to have a caption, a system menu and a minimize box. Additionally, we're going to click for the DS Center option to allow the dialog to be centered automatically in the middle of the desktop. If we go back to the General tab, we can set the caption on the dialog. And we can set the ID name of the dialog also. And there we have it, set at the top, Project Creator. We'll now need to put some controls on the dialog. One thing it's useful to do is to put a status bar at the bottom of our dialog. This allows us to display messages to the user quite easily. We'll find the status bar control over on this toolkit. If we double click on that, it will automatically appear at the bottom of the dialog. If we open it up, we can take the caption off and replace it with the word ready. And we'll leave the ID name as status bar 1. And we'll hit the OK button. So there are several pieces of information we need to extract from the user. First of all, we want to know the name of the project. So we will create two controls, one label for the title and one for the field we want the user to fill in to give us the name of the project. We will click on the label to set the title. It's always useful to have a naming convention for all the objects on your dialog. It's all very well having them called Label 1, Label 2, Label 3, etc. However, if you need to refer to any of these objects in code, calling them Label 1 and Label 2 is not terribly helpful. Giving them a sensible name which indicates the purpose of the object makes life much easier for those coming after you to support the application. So having set our caption, I'm now going to use the foreground setting to change the colour of that label, just so it stands out. If we apply that and hit OK, we'll see that the project name setting now appears in blue. So we have made the text box slightly larger to allow the user to have longer names for the project. If we double click on that, we can now set the settings. We will leave the caption initially blank, and we will give it a name. I tend to use a naming convention with TXT in front of all the text boxes and LBL in front of all the labels. Since this is a text box for the project name, we'll call it text project name. This allows it to be matched up quite easily in code with the label. So now that we've set these controls on screen, we'll need to know where the project is going to sit to allow the application to create the directory. For our next controls, we could consider giving the user a folder browser control. This would allow them to browse to the folder which is going to contain all of our files. However, we've already established the name of the folder they wish to create, and if all of our folders are going to be created in one directory, all we need to know is what that directory actually is. I currently produce 2 YouTube channels, one for software, which is all PowerBasic, and one for hardware. So if we're going to make this application work for both channels, all I need to do is to ask the user, is this a hardware video or a software video? So we will provide to the user a simple combo box. And we'll add a label above that to prompt the user to select. And again, we'll set the colour. So if we open up the combo box, we'll see we're going to have a number of options here. First of all, we'll take the caption off, and we'll set the name of it. As regards styles, we have 3 choices here. It can be a drop-down, which is a combination of text box and drop-down list controls. This would allow the user to pick the type from the list or to key it in. In this case, we want a simple list which only has 2 choices. So we will pick CBS Simple. And one other option you have is to automatically sort the values. We'll leave this one selected. And if we hit OK here, that is our drop-down list on the screen. In our application, we will set the values of this combo box to be either PowerBasic or hardware. For the PowerBasic videos, I tend to use a PowerPoint presentation for the initial start of the video. I've created 4 sample templates which the user can pick from. So we're going to present these also as a drop-down list for the user to select. So we'll need another combo box. You can quite easily clone one of these by selecting both objects, right-clicking, copy, right-click and paste. We can then move this further down the screen and we can do some renaming. And we'll change this to Select Template. And we will change the combo box name also to be Combo Template. Additionally, we will want at least one button on the dialog. That will be the button to actually create the project. And there is our button at the bottom right hand corner of the dialog. The user could always close this particular dialog by clicking on the X at the top right hand corner of the dialog. However, we'll give them a cancel button as well to allow them to exit out of the application. And we can quite easily choose the ID abort ID name for that. And we'll hit OK. So our dialog is now taking shape. We've allowed the user to enter the project name, select the video type, and to select the template to be used. This is enough to start off our project. So we will save that and we will go back to the editor. And we'll overwrite the project creator.bas. And we can now close down the form designer and go back to the code, which will tell us that it has been altered by another application, which it has indeed. And there is our code. We will find at the very bottom of the application is the original code we set up, which we can now just remove. If we press the F2 button to bring up the code finder, we can see that there are indeed 4 functions in this application. 3 main functions, and 1 callback function. So if we look at the PB main, we will see there is the call for our dialog, the dialog project creator. Further down we can see the callback function, the event handler of our dialog. PowerBasic has put a certain amount of code in for you. So we can see a reference to our 2 buttons, the button to create the project and the button to exit the application. At the moment these contain just message boxes. So before we go any further, we'll add 1 line of code in for the exit button, and that is the dialog end command. This instructs our application to end the dialog, and the single parameter we're giving it in this point is the handle of the dialog, cb.hdl. That's the callback handle. If we attempt to run our application, the dialog now appears on screen. So we can either close the dialog by using the X at the top right hand corner or clicking on the exit button, and the application exits quite cleanly. So we will also remove the message box in the handler for the create project button, and we will put some code in there when we're going to be doing the work. So if we nip back for the moment to the forms handler, and I'm going to change the settings for the combo boxes from CBS Simple to drop down list. And we will once more save that. If we run our code again now, you'll see that the drop-down lists are invisible until the user actually clicks on them, and it has populated some values in the drop-down lists. The beauty of doing it this way is that they don't take up any room on screen and they don't overwrite anything underneath. So we will now set the values of these drop-down lists. And we can do that in the initialize dialog section of our callback function. We can quite easily populate the value in these combo boxes. As we saw when we ran the application, there are some values populated in there already. So let's have a look to see how the application is doing it at the moment. If we have a look at the dialog itself where it's created, we will see there is a sample combo box entry down here, which is actually populating these 2 combo boxes. And there is our function. It's using the combo box add command to add information to the combo box. We could quite easily use the combo box add to add the 2 values. But we've got one of our libraries which can do this quite easily. So for this application I'm going to take this function out as we won't be needing it. And we will take both of these out as well. And at the beginning of our application I'm going to add one of our libraries, which contains a function we can make use of. This library is called PB Windows Controls. And the function we're going to make use of is this populate combo function. This particular function has 4 parameters. The dialog handle, the handle to the combo box, an array, and a pre-selection option. So the dialog handle is going to be the CB handle. The combo box we want to add is the first combo box. So we'll make that the video type one. The next is the array. So we will dimension an array to hold our information. So we have dimensioned an array at the top of our callback function, our event handler. We're dimensioning that array here to be of 2 elements, and it's going to be a string array. We've then assigned the values to that array as hardware and the word PowerBasic. We're then using our populate combo function to populate that combo box. So if we try running the application now, the application will run, and our video type now has 2 values in it, hardware and PowerBasic. The use of this function will make it very easy to populate combo boxes, especially where there is a pre-selection that needs to be picked. So if we wanted it to default to the word PowerBasic, we could quite simply put the word PowerBasic in here. And if we run the application now, it would run and it would be pre-selected as PowerBasic, but it would still allow the user to pick hardware instead. So having populated this first combo box, we need now to populate the second. So for that, we need to go up one directory and then down into the templates directory, and then into the PowerBasic folder, and then pull back all the information that's in here. We need a drop down containing the names of each of these files. As the number of files can vary, we'll have to pull them back using the dir command. So let's create a small function whose job it will be to take the values that we're seeing here on screen and put those names into an array, and then we can use the function we've just used to populate the combo box. So in order to pass the parameters to this new getTemplates function, we need to actually determine which type of video the user has actually selected. Now we know here in our initialization we have pre-selected PowerBasic, but to get into the habit of actually not assuming what the user has selected and allowing us to actually have a mechanism by which we can determine what the user has selected, we're going to use a control get text command. This will get the text that has been selected on the combo box. Our combo box is set to only allow the user to select one item. Therefore, the control get text will return that single item, if it has indeed been selected. If it has not been selected, then this variable at the end here, the video type, will contain an empty length string. If the user has selected something, it will contain the text that appears on the combo box that the user has indeed selected. So we give it the parameters of the dialog handle, the handle of the combo box, and the variable into which we want to place that value. We can then pass that value to our new function, getTemplates. And we're passing another parameter, which is the array that we want that function to populate. That will then contain a list of all the templates the user can select from. So let's go and create that function. So just in case we haven't pre-selected PowerBasic as being the type of video, we're going to check to see if the video type has actually got anything in it. So if the video type being passed in does not contain any information, we will redimension the array without specifying its size. Therefore the array, although dimensioned, will be completely and utterly empty. So now we have to go into this PowerBasic folder and pull back all the names of the PowerPoint presentations. And we want to put the value in the file name variable into our array. And we can do that quite easily by using a counter, which will initially be 0. And we can populate that array using our counter variable with the file name. And once there are no more files to find, we will exit the while loop. At that point, our array of 100 elements will contain a certain number of entries. And since we've used the long counter, we know exactly how many that is. So we can now redimension the array so it only has the values that we've put in it. We will then have a populated array with the 4 templates in it. It will then, of course, have 96 blank entries. But since we know the number of records we found by using a long counter, we can do a redim command using preserve to only preserve the first 4 elements. And then back in our callback function, we can add on another piece of code. This is to use the populate combo function once more. The only difference with this is we're using a different combo box. We're going to populate the select template combo box. If we try running that code now, we will see that the select template has now been populated with the names of each of our templates. So this will allow our user to select one of them. So we've now provided to the user 2 drop-down lists for them to select from. Before we allow the user to click on Create Project, we'll have to do a certain amount of validation on the screen to ensure first of all the user has actually entered a project name, that they have picked a video type, and they have picked a template. There are a number of ways of actually performing this. We can put our validation in the code underneath the Create Project button, or we could do it dynamically to ensure that as each of these are actually populated, the Create Project button would automatically be enabled and would be disabled if they had not selected any of them. So we're going to make this quite straightforward. We're going to put the code underneath the Create Project button. So let's go and do that validation. In our callback handler, you'll see there's already a piece of code in here which we can tack onto. In the WM command section, this is where each of the controls on the screen has actually been mentioned. We already have a button create project event, and this has already been wrapped with this command here. This will trap for the button click, so this is where we want to put our code. So first of all, we want to pull back the value from each of the controls. So we will use a control get text command to pull back from our dialog, from the control we wish to interrogate, and a variable we want to put the data into. And we can do exactly the same for the video type combo box and for the select tempo combo box. We can quite easily type the commands as so, with 3 lines, control get text, for each of the objects. To make it a little less wordy and easier to read on screen, we can use the prefix command. Programmatically, this is exactly the same. When PowerBasic compiles your application, it takes the prefix and prepends it to the beginning of each of the following lines. But it does make your code a little more readable on the screen. So we're using 3 new variables, so we'll need to create these variables at the top of our code. And now we have declared them. So now that we've actually populated these 3 new variables, we can now test their values to ensure that the user has actually made selections or keyed in entries. So we can use an if command to test the value of the project name variable. If that is indeed blank, we can reset the focus to that particular control on the screen to allow the user to key it in. We'll also need to tell the user that there's some information missing. So we could either do that with a message box, or we can use the status bar at the bottom of the dialog. So this will set the text on the status bar to the words selection missing. So if we run this now, and if we hit the create project, it will put the entry at the bottom. To make it really obvious for the user, we can actually change the label control from blue to red. So using the control set color command with the dialog handle, the object handle, in this case the label project name, and we're setting the foreground color to red and the background color to be whatever it was originally. And then to ensure that Windows will then redraw that particular control, we're using the control redraw command. So if we run that code now, and then hit the create project, it will recolor the label to enter the project name from blue to red. This will focus the eye of the user to where the error on the form exists. So we can do the same logic for the rest. However, if the user has actually selected it, we want to ensure that if the user has made an error, that the color red is removed from the label. So if we run our code now, the user hits create project, it goes red. They put a name in, hit create project, and it goes back to blue again. Now what we need to do is exactly the same code for each of the combo boxes. So while we can put all that code in, it's a fair bit of typing. And the fact we'll have to do it for 3 controls, and in other projects possibly more than 3 controls, it's quite a lot to do. And it's crying out to have a library function to perform this kind of action. So that's exactly what I've done. I've created a new function called highlight control. This will take a number of parameters. The first being the dialog handle. The second being the control that we want to set the focus to. The next to be the label associated with that control that we want to change color to. And the next value is the color we want that label to go to. And the final 2 are the handle for the status bar and the text you wish to put on the status bar. And the second function is to clear the highlight. When no error has occurred, you'll then pass it the handle of the dialog, the label, the color you want that label to go, and the text you want to put in to the status bar. So I've put that code in for the video type and for the template. So if we try running our code now, you will see if we hit create project, the project name will be highlighted as being in error. And if we hit create project once more, then the select template will be red and the project name will be blue. And then if we do actually pick something from the template list and create project, it goes back to blue again. So now that we've completed the validation on our dialog, we can now go ahead and create the project. Now that we have validated the information on screen that the user has entered, we can now go ahead and start to build our project. So we will encapsulate that functionality in a new function. And we will pass to that function in parameters the data we have gathered from the dialog. That will be the project name, the video type, and the template the user has selected. And this function will return a true or a false. True if the project has been created successfully, and false if it has not. And we will feedback that information to our user on the dialog by simply setting the text on the status bar to either build successful or build unsuccessful. So let's go ahead and create this new function. So having passed the new parameters, this new function has a number of stages to complete. It must first go into our YouTube folder, either into the PowerBasic subfolder or to the hardware subfolder, and it must create the project name within that as a new folder. In order to do this, we will set a constant up in the code. This constant will contain the location of the YouTube folder, under which all subfolders will be created. So here at the beginning of our code is the setting up of our constant. We're setting that to our H drive and a subfolder of YouTube. We will create a local variable called path, and into this we will put the constant, which is our video vault path, and add to that the project name. We can now test to see whether this folder already exists. If it already exists, then we will raise an error and pass this back to the user. We can do that using a simple message box, reporting that the project name already exists. This is set as a task modal message box, where all top-level windows belonging to the current application are disabled until the message box is dismissed. This will appear to the user with a simple OK button. If the folder does not exist, we can attempt to create the folder. We can then, within a try-catch block, attempt to create the new folder using the mkdir command. If for some reason this errors, we will again display a message box to the user. We can use error $ to pull back the text of the error message and display that in the message box. If the mkdir command does not error, then we have successfully created the new folder. Next on the list of tasks is to create the recordings folder. This will be the folder into which our video recording will be placed. And again, should this fail, we will then pick up the error message and display it to the user. One thing I have forgotten to do is to create the subfolder for the video type. The video type is either going to be PowerBasic or hardware. So our video vault location comes first, followed by the video type, which could be PowerBasic, then a subfolder of the project name. So having created the recordings folder, our final task in this function will be to copy in the PowerPoint template into the root of the folder. To perform this copy, we first need to know where the source of the template is. We already know the template name. The source path to where the templates exist is the execution path, going back one folder, going down into the templates folder, adding on the video type, either PowerBasic or hardware, and then adding on the selected template name. This gives us a path directly to the file we wish to copy. We can then use the file copy command to copy from our source path to our new destination, which is the path we worked out earlier, and the name of the file we have selected from the initial dialog. We can then test to ensure that the file copy occurred successfully. We can do that by testing the error variable. If the error variable is 0, then it has been a successful copy. If error contains a number other than 0, then an error occurred, and we can again notify the user of this issue. Again, using a message box. The very last task I wish to perform is to rename the selected template. In our templates folder, we can see that all the PowerPoint presentation files follow a similar format. They start with the type of template it is, followed by 4 X's. What we're going to do next is to replace those 4 X's with the name of the project. That way, each file will be uniquely named. So we should be able to rename the file by using the PowerBasic name command, giving it to the path and the name of the file as it currently stands, and then giving it the path and the name of the file that you wish to change the name to. Before we execute this command, we need to populate this new variable. And we can perform that by using the PowerBasic replace command to replace the 4 X's with the project name in the new select template variable. Now we have referenced a couple of new variables we're going to have to declare in this function. So we will declare the new select template and the source path at the top of our function. Let's try a test compile now to see if we've missed anything. And the application compiles quite cleanly. As this will be the first running of our application, we need to test to see if it works. If you are ever in doubt of your application running on its very first run, it's quite useful to use the debug facility of PowerBasic. So we'll do that to step through to our project to see how far it gets. So we will set a breakpoint right at the beginning of this build project function by clicking on a code line and pressing the F9 key, which will highlight the line in red. This is a breakpoint which we can go through the program until it reaches that line of code. And if we run the application by using the bug on the toolbar, our application will run and will give us a variable watcher. This allows us to track variables. So if we go back to the main code and press the F5 key, it will bring up our dialog. So let's now fill in our dialog. We'll call the project name Project Creator. We'll leave it set to PowerBasic, and we will pick a template and we'll call that a snippet. We'll then click on Create Project. As you'll see in the background, the code has now stopped on our highlighted line. So we can now step through our code in PowerBasic line by line to ensure that the program is going to operate correctly. So if we press the F8 key, it will go through one line at a time. We can right click on a variable and add it to our watch list. So we can see the folder which our application is actually set up to use, which is H, YouTube, PowerBasic, Project Creator. We're now going to test to see if this folder exists. And it's saying the folder does not exist, which is good because that's what we want to happen. We're then going to attempt to make the directory. And as that did not error, our directory should have been created. So let's just nip back into Explorer to ensure that happened. So there at the very top of our list of project folders is a new Project Creator folder, which is ideal. It has successfully created our directory. Let's step through the rest of the code now. It's now created the recordings folder, and it's now going to pick up the source path, which we can add to our watch list. And this is where our template's going to be coming from. So executing this next line of code will attempt to do a file copy from the templates folder into our project path. And no error has occurred, therefore our PowerPoint file should now have been copied into the folder. And there it is indeed. We now have the recordings folder and the PowerPoint presentation. So if we push on in the code and we get the new select template variable, which is exactly the same as the selected one at the moment, we will then run the replace command. So it has replaced the 4 X's in the original variable with the word Project Creator. So we will now attempt to rename that file. And if we look in the folder, we can see the file has now been successfully renamed. So we can now exit out of the debug. The last thing to add to our code is to test if the rename had actually worked successfully. So we can do that either by testing the error variable or putting in a try-catch block. So as we have done before, testing error to see if it's equal to 0 will determine whether the rename was successful or not. If not, we will display the message box back to the user, and if it has been successful, we will return true to the function. So now that we completed one test under debug, let's try running the executable on its own. We will now run the project creator executable, and we'll enter this one just as test. We will pick a template, and we will click create project. And we're getting the build successful message at the bottom of the screen. So if we now go back into Explorer, we now have a test project at the top with a recordings subfolder and a test project PowerPoint presentation. So what we have done today is we have successfully created a small, simple dialog to capture information from a user. We're then taking the information the user has provided, we are validating each of the fields on the screen and displaying error messages and highlighting in red that something has been missed. If all the validation passes, we're then performing a number of tasks to create folders and subfolders, copying a file into one of those folders and renaming it based on the user's selections. So using an approach like this will allow you to add automation to common tasks, to allow them to be done in a consistent and reliable manner. Hopefully you'll find this code useful in your applications, but that's it for today. Thank you for watching.